Before I go into the topic, so obviously the topic today is Jesus' death and resurrection, right? Uh, we have visited what apologetics means in the first week. That's what we did. We kind of dove deep into like the meaning of it, like what should we do. We looked at the authenticity of the Bible, and last week we talked about Jesus and who he was and what he means to us as Christians. So I'm going to bring it all together today, but before that, kind of wanted to talk about me and my boys. So I have two boys, Kyron and Khalil. They're 3 and 21 months, and they're a bunch. But I love them. They call me Abba. That's a word they use. I speak Bengali, so in Bengali, the word Abba means dad. There's another place that Abba also means dad, and it's in Jewish, Abba, father. You have heard that term a lot. The reason I bring that up is I love my sons a lot. And if I think that my death will somehow bring them to heaven, that's entirely not true, right? Like, that's not going to happen. And yet, here is the Abba Father who is going to die. And we're going to go through that. And he died, and he resurrects, and he's the salvation that we gained. So the reason I bring that up is when I was going through my trials of accepting Jesus, this was my biggest trial. Like knowing that, okay, so Jesus is God, all right. Why would God have to die? Why would he have to die and then be raised up alive? What does that have to do with my salvation? Because that is critically the biggest question you as a Christian will be asked, and you have to answer that. Like, where does your salvation lie? Does your salvation lie in how good you're as a student? Does it lie of being here, coming to Journey Youth every Wednesday? Does it mean going to church? Does it mean reading a Bible verse? No. Ultimately means that nothing that we do matters, right? Like in the song Pastor Dylan just sang, all we can do is praise God. Like that's all we can offer. We cannot offer our deeds and our works. So I want to go with that in our mind as we dive deep into Jesus' death and resurrection. So in historically accepted facts, there are three things that scholars and next slide, please. Thank you. Next slide. Sorry, I went through that. Okay, so there are three historically accepted facts, like scholars, that is, like academic people who are not Christians, as well as non-academics who are followers of Jesus and are religious scholars, believe these three things. Jesus did die through crucifixion. The tomb was found to be empty by women. Jesus' multiple appearances to disciples and non-disciples alike. So the non-disciples are James, brother of Jesus, and Paul, who was Saul at the time when Jesus appeared to him. So if those are already accepted, all right, case closed, let's go home, right? But it's not that simple. So the point is, it's not that simple because of the fact, even though people believe that the people who said that they saw Jesus truly did see Jesus, they don't think what they saw was truly Jesus. Does that make sense? Yes? No? Whew. Really silent right now. That's what I'm trying to figure out. All right, so if those are the three accepted facts, let's move on to the next thing, right? So let's try to dig deep into crucifixion and death. So what is crucifixion? So crucifixion is a form of capital punishment that is performed by multiple different cultures and societies. And it's basically something like a wooden stake where you would be bound or nailed by your feet and by your hands, and that's it. So you had no other support on that stake or cross. That's all it was. If we look at the Bible and what does the Bible say, before even the crucifixion, during the different court trials that Jesus had, Jesus received flagellations. Now, that word sounds really weird, but I wanted to have a photo of what it really means. So it's a sort of a whip that is used. And this whip, if you cannot see clearly, there's like little balls. Those are like little metal balls that are tied into the rope. And those little pieces, those are pieces of bones, bone shards. Imagine this. So like it's a rope that has metal balls and bone shards attached to it, and then you're whipped across your back. I think I should have probably given a PG-13 warning or something before I started talking about this, but this is the truth, right? So Jesus was, flagellation was used against him on his back, on his whips. So even before he got to the cross, he's severely injured. His back is bleeding. There is people who have beaten him, who have punched him, and he's being walked to his cross. Mark 15 says, they brought Jesus to the place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. Then they offered him wine mixed with myrrh, but he did not take it. And they crucified him. Dividing up his clothes, they cast lots to see what each would get. It was 9 a.m. when they crucified him. The written notice of the charge against him read, "The King of the Jews." The reason it was reading "King of the Jews" is something that the Romans put up, not by the Pharisees. The Pharisees did not think he was the king of the Jews. It was Pontius Pilate's trial that sentenced him to that crucifixion. So what does a crucifixion look like? So I put up a photo. This is like a archaeological evidence that they found of what crucifixion looked like. So oftentimes you will see photos of what a crucifixion is, and the nail normally is to the top of the foot, but it's actually from the side on your ankle onto the stake. So imagine, who wants to be a volunteer? All right, come on up. So imagine you're standing, right? So you're standing up here, and the stake is behind you, right down the middle, and your ankles are what's being attached from nails from both sides. Okay, now, thank you. That's all I need. So there's that. But now comes the hard part. So here's where scholars will debate. So some scholars believe there were nails that were attached, or through the Bible, we know that there were nails on Jesus' hands. Other scholars say they were just hung, like ropes were used to just hang the arms against the post, and they were just hung. No support, no one's holding you up, that's all. 2 nails on the arms, 2 nails on the side of your ankles, and you're hung there. And Jesus is put up there at 9 a.m. So then the question is, okay, that seems really painful, but how did Jesus really die? So the Journal of American Medical Association, JAMA for short, they discovered that at the side of the crucifixion, his wrists were nailed to the patibulum. The patibulum is the stake. After the patibulum was lifted onto the upright post, his feet were nailed to the stipes. So what happens is when you're doing a crucifixion, you're laid on the ground with it. And then you're nailed. And then you're pulled up, put into the ground, and then your ankles are nailed. Imagine that for a second. Just think about that. So after that, the major physiologic effect of the crucifixion was an interference with normal respirations. So have you ever just done like pull-ups, right? So when you're doing pull-ups on like a pole, the hardest thing to do on a pull-up is breathing. You have to be able to breathe, but at least you're able to move up and down. So in this position, you're not able to move up and down, and your chest, torso area is collapsing into you. Your weight, the force of gravity is collapsing into you. Your lungs are pushing down, and what's happening is you're having a hard time breathing. So ultimately, what the Journal of Medical Association decided is that it's most likely that asphyxiation, or the inability to breathe, is what led to Jesus' death. As you can see, the verse I've picked out is Matthew 27:45. From noon until 3 in the afternoon, darkness came over the land. About 3 in the afternoon, Jesus cried out in a loud voice, Eli, Eli, lema sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? When some of those standing around heard this, said, he's calling Elijah. Immediately one of them ran and got a sponge. He filled it with wine vinegar, put it on a staff, and offered it to Jesus to drink. The rest said, now leave him alone. Let's see if Elijah comes to save him. And when Jesus cried out again in a loud voice, he gave up his spirit. So in John, it actually says that he said, it is finished. You might hear that as well. So there's a difference in account, but it's still saying the same essential story as we discussed before. So this is how Jesus dies. So then comes the question of resurrection, right? So if we go to the next slide. So resurrection story, I would actually like 3 volunteers. If you have a Bible app to be able to read through the Bible. 3? I got 1, 2, 3. All right, so come up here. And so I'll read Matthew 28, 110. And so, so I'll read Matthew 28, 110. So look up, if you go to the next slide, Pastor Dylan, thank you. So you can look up Mark. So Mark will be chapter 15, verse 1 through 8. Luke will be chapter, I cannot remember. It's the second to the last chapter, Luke. And John also the second to the last chapter. And verses 1. Are you looking up John? You're going to look up John for me? Okay. So yeah, look up Luke, and it's verses 1 through 10. I'm sorry, I forgot to put up the chapter there. That was my fault. I'll blame my allergies on it. Has everyone looked it up? Chapter, the second to the last one. So, does it match up? Is it good? No? No, it's not 10, it's 1. Technical difficulties. 24. Chapter 24, John. Are you good on yours? It matches up. Okay. So, okay. So if you can back up, I'll read Matthew. So Matthew says, after the Sabbath, at dawn on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. The angel said to the woman, do not be afraid. I know that you are looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He is not here. He is risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. So I'll let you read. Okay, let me see. Okay, there you go. Got it. I'm going to speak a little louder. Nazarene, you're good? You're good. Yeah, thank you. All right. Okay. Yeah, thank you. All right, go for it. Linen, you're good. Yep. All right, thank you guys. Yeah, that was a technical difficulty on my part, but thank you for walking me through it. So, what did we learn from that? So there's four accounts, right? Luke, Matthew, Mark, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Thank you. I always forget how they go. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are all telling the same story. They're saying there were women who went to the tomb. The tomb was empty, and some of them saw an angel, or some of them saw some men that were lightning and dazzling, and then they went and told the story back to the disciples, right? Now, let's pause there for a second. Who are the first witnesses of the empty tomb? The women with the spices. Exactly. So it is very interesting that it's women who first see the tomb empty. Let me tell you why. Because that's a really good question. Why are the women first to tell that the tomb is empty? Women in that time period were not considered valuable witnesses. So, all you ladies over here, I would not believe one thing you say because I don't agree. Now, it's from women, I don't care, right? So, women and children were put in the same category of like valuable witnesses, meaning that they were not valuable at all. So, the early church, so there's four testimony accounts, and they're all saying women are the ones to first witness this message. Why is that? They could have chosen anybody else, right? They could have chosen Matthew. They could have chosen Peter. They could have chosen Nicodemus because he was the one who helped get the tomb in the first place. But they chose women because they chose to preserve the truth. The truth was important to the apostles more than what looks good. If you look at the Bible, if you look at New Testament, you see a bunch of people who are not good people. They haven't done good things. They're not perfect. We see Peter who denies Jesus not once, not twice, 3 times before Jesus' death. We see Mary Magdalene, who is possessed by demons, to be probably one of the first women to have witnessed the empty tomb. Why is that? Why are there so many imperfect stories in the New Testament or even in the Old Testament? It's because it's being preserved with truth, not being sugar-coated. Let me tell you why I think that's important. As a Muslim, I grew up with reading the Quran, and in the Quran, not one person, not any of the prophets or messengers are ever painted in a bad light. Have any of you heard the story where Abraham lies to the king about his wife? Yes. Yeah, exactly. So Abraham, so scared of his own life, for his own life, he says, "Oh, this is not my wife, this is my sister." Which, by the way, really weird thing to say about your wife. Like, no, we're just bros, like I don't care. No. So he says that he's sister, and then what does God do? God actually everything that we come from, Jesus comes from Abraham. So God takes imperfect, not good people and turns them into something more than that. And that's the story that's always preserved in the Bible. So I just wanted you guys to think about that when you read the story and why women were being used in that story. So with that comes criticisms, right? So obviously, that's the point of apologetics. Somebody has a problem with everything that I just said. That's why I'm here. So what are the issues that the critics talk about? So critics there are 4 theories. Yeah, so does anyone know who that is? There we go. Awesome. So the reason I used it is because these theories are something that atheists, agnostics, Muslims use against the resurrection all the time. So the first theory is called the swoon theory. And the swoon theory is basically saying that Jesus had not completely died. He was actually alive when he was brought down from the cross, and he was put in the tomb half dead. Hallucination theory just says that all the appearances of Jesus to his disciples and non-disciples were just hallucinations. They just thought it up. The third one is a theft theory, saying that the disciples stole Jesus' body from the tomb and hid it. And then the fourth theory is twin theory, saying Jesus had a twin, the twin is the one who got killed, so he's the one who was put in the tomb. And the reason I have Jackie Chan up there is because these theories make my mind hurt the same way it hurts him. So let's go into the issues with the theories themselves. So we just discussed the crucifixion, right? So we just discussed flagellation has been used against him. He's nailed to the cross, so he has severe bleeding injuries while his lungs have collapsed. So you're saying that he actually was laid on the tomb, he somehow was still alive, sneaked past the guards, and then went about 90 miles to Galilee on foot while bleeding. With collapsed lungs. Yes, thank you. With collapsed lungs, almost no clothes. Do you guys see a problem with that theory? Yeah. And also, in the history of crucifixions, nobody has survived a crucifixion. So, there's that. The second theory, what does science say about hallucinations? You cannot have a group hallucination. You cannot all see the same thing as a hallucination. Like, you cannot see the same dream at the same time. That would be really weird, and science says your brains are not connected like that. The other part of hallucinations, you cannot hallucinate anything that you haven't seen in real life in some form or fashion. So have you ever hallucinated the same scenario because you did something and you're like, whoa, I just saw different. Yes, it's called deja vu, but it's also like a hallucination because you're some people even say they actually saw what they say. But that's not what's happening here. There's 5 different people at the same time seeing Jesus. There's Paul, who's seeing Jesus 2 to 3 years after Jesus' death in a different city, when Paul was actually on his way to crush the Christian rebellion. And we have multitudes of other non-believers who saw Jesus and have accounted for that. So hallucinations is not the answer. Sorry. Theft, right? So they were talking about theft. We still have to account for the guards. So someone has to steal them. And the theory is that the disciples stole the body, which was being guarded by guards. Now here's the question. who were the guards? Like, what group were they from? Do you guys know? Roman. So that's like a very big like thought. Like everybody says like there were Roman guards that were used. If you see any resurrection story photos, it will always show like a Roman guard there. Yes, sir. Yes. So in the Bible story, they were coming after Sabbath day to come anoint the body. So the guards were there, and then the guards helped roll the tomb, and they went inside because it was like by Jewish tradition to anoint a body after death. So that's what they were trying to do. Yeah, no, hey, that's a really good question. So yeah, so the guards were scared and petrified of it. That's what the biblical story says. So it's not like the guards were like gone in the morning. Guards were there. They were just petrified of the situation, and the angel is sitting inside in the tomb. So the tombs back in the day were kind of like caves. So that's why it was like rolled over with a stone. So they were inside. The guards were in front of the stone. So going back to the point of Roman guards are like were not there. Most scholars can agree to the point that there were probably Jewish temple guards that were used at that time. Why is that the case? Glad you asked. So the reason that was the case is because Pilate did not care about Jewish issues. He treated the whole situation with Jesus as a Jewish inter issue. So he was not going to lend his Roman guards for a Jewish dead body. So these were possibly Jewish temple guards. So now think about this. So there are these disciples who were too scared to be around Jesus at the very end of his life. So they're going to gather up all their money because they have a lot of it, and they're going to bribe Jewish temple guards who were appointed there by Pharisees to guard that body. That's not happening. It's just not happening. It's absurd. It's an absurd idea that they would give up taking that body for some money. And the last theory, the issue with the twins, there is no historical document that shows Jesus had a twin. Wouldn't that be one of the first things that we would read? Like, especially like having twins is a medical marvel. Like it's very rare when it happens. So that would be something historically found, and that's not found. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what that brings us to the conclusion of? The conclusion that we get is that is oftentimes used by Christians, and this is called the minimal facts argument. So the minimal facts argument is that everything, like all the facts that we have, point towards the actual resurrection of Jesus. The swoon theory does not account for all the facts that we have. The twin theory does not account for all the facts that we have. The hallucination theory does not account for all these facts we have. Neither does the steal or the thief theory. So, with the facts that we have based on the Bible, we can, with certainty, at least for me, I can believe that Jesus was resurrected after his death. So with that said, I'm going to go into some final notes. So obviously, all good things come to an end. If I had more time, I would probably dive into more questions. Pastor Michael and I have talked about all the different things that you could dive into. We could talk about what is Calvinism, what is Arminianism, what is sin. We could dive into if there is God, how can there be a hell? We could talk about if God is so good and almighty, why is there so much pain and suffering in the world? We could dive into all those questions. But the thing is, you don't need to know the answer to all these questions. I want you guys to focus on what you know and what you believe in. And if you have the time and the patience to learn more, and you want to be an apologist, here's some tips and tricks that I'm going to give you. So, do's and don'ts. Next slide. So, do's and don'ts for you guys. Study the Bible. It is the best source of information for you when it comes to being an apologist or being an apologetic, but also know how to study it. There's exegesis and eisegesis. Exegesis is basically taking the Bible in its context and reading it for what it is. I see some of you guys and girls who have Instagram and have on their little bio Philippians 4:13, and that's all good and great. But the thing is, you need to know who Philippians 4:13 was written for, right? Who was Philippians 4:13 written for? Yeah. Yes. So the Church of Philippi is what it's written for. And I'm not trying to shame you for having it on your Instagram bio, but what I'm trying to say is, when he said that we can do all things through Christ, he was not talking about the home run that you can hit at the bottom of the seventh. Okay? So let's try to read it in context. Let's try to read it for what it is. Let's not try to put ourselves inside of it. Let's not say, oh man, I have my Goliaths. Because the Goliath already happened. Okay? And also let the Holy Spirit guide you when you're reading the Bible. I haven't talked at all about the Holy Spirit, and He is God too. And that is part of the Holy Trinity. And that is our advisor, that's our guide. So if you're reading the Bible and you're stuck, pray that the Holy Spirit can guide you to that right path. And also just put some grace on yourselves. You're not going to know everything. Someone's going to ask you a question and you're going to be stumped. Trust me, it happens to me all the time. But give yourself grace, take it all in, and then go search for the answer. Now, don'ts on apologetics, and I am myself would say I have done all of these at some point or the other. Don't try to win an argument. Being an apologetic is not about winning an argument. It is about presenting the facts that you have about Jesus and letting that person make the decision. There's no compulsion. You cannot force anybody to become a Christ follower. There's nothing in you that you can do to force someone into a Christ follower. You can present the message, and you can love them, and you can share the gospel with them. Ultimately, it is their choice. Don't stop critical thinking. Think through things. If somebody's asking you a question, try to understand why they're asking it. And also, like, if you are stuck on something in the Bible, don't just say, well, I'm stuck, not going to talk about it. No, you have to look for resources. You have to look for guidance on those matters. Don't be prideful. There's nothing prideful about, yeah, I won it. Like, my Jesus is cool, your God is not, yeah. Like, it's not going to help you. It's not going to bring anyone to Jesus. Trust me. I've had people drop the Bible on me at times, and I'm like, sorry, I don't agree with this. And lastly, don't use Christianese. Now, people who here may not understand what that term is. Christianese is using very biblical-based terms. Try to break down things that are simple for others to understand. You and I may understand what salvation means, what Jesus' resurrection means, but try to break down those terms. What does that mean for somebody who is not a Christ follower? So with all that said, I'm going to thank you guys for all this time. It's been wonderful. Thank you, Pastor Michael, for giving me. And these are some of the resources that I research and study. If you want to take a photo of it and try to do more studying, go on it. Thank you all.